Alright, so after you've installed one of those minimalist distros like Arch or Gentoo, you're probably going to want to build out a graphical environment, install some applications, create some new users, and do all of the things that you would do in any other OS like Windows or the Mac OS, but with all of the freedoms and the power and none of the spookiness that Linux gives you. But when you install a minimalist distro like this, Arch Linux install that I have here, you only have this blank screen with a shell prompt and nothing else. Well, this is really what Linux is at the end of the day, or really this is what GNU/Linux is, because Linux itself is really just the kernel, and all of those GUIs and config tools are additional software that people have written for Linux. So I'm going to show you now how to take a basic minimalist install like Arch or Gentoo and turn it into a system with a graphical environment and a regular user, because right now I only have a root user configured on this box. And I'll also configure some systemd basics, since that's the init system on Arch and most other Linux distributions. So let's start with creating our user. The base command is user add. Easy enough to remember, and we want to use the M and the G switches together to create the user's home directory and specify what group we want to add them to. So I'm going to add them to the wheel group, and finally give the name of the user that you want to create. So this just created the user Kenny in the group wheel as well as his home directory. And the reason you typically want to add a user to the wheel group is because when we configure Pseudo, we're going to allow all users in the wheel group to have access to that command, effectively making them all an administrator, at least if they know the root password, because this actually serves as an additional layer of protection if you needed to add multiple users that don't have admin access. So to set your new user's password now, you simply type PASSWD, followed by the name of the user, and then type in the password once, and then a second time. And if you make a mistake or you want to learn more about these commands for the users, I suggest you read the man pages on user add, user del to delete a user, group add, and so on. So now to give your user sudo access, because like I said before, there's multiple layers of protection from administrator access in Linux. We need to vim into etc sudoers file, and we want to go to the line that has the wheel group in it right here. So there's actually a couple of different options that you can do here. So like it says, we can uncomment the line here, wheel, and this is going to allow members of that group, Kenny is the only one that we have right now, to execute any command. Down here, you can do the same thing, but without a password. So if you wanted to just be able to execute like sudo pacman, s install whatever package, but without typing a password, this is how you would do that. And there's also the sudo group, which you could configure if you were in a situation where you were going to have multiple users. So maybe if you were in a school library, you would only want the administrators to be in the pseudo group, and then you would probably add teachers and students into the wheel group, or more likely you would configure even more granular control, because within your sudoers file, you can really specify like nitty-gritty commands. Again, none of that's really necessary if you're just using Linux as a desktop OS. If you're in an enterprise, then obviously you would want to configure that with more specific settings depending on what department people were going to be working in. Another option that I like to add in my sudoers file is defaults tty tickets. And what that line does is it prevents you from having to give a root password a second time if you spawn an additional terminal where you're going to run root commands. Now, obviously, this is less secure, And you also don't need this if you do the no password option, which is also obviously less secure, but I enjoy it and you might as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And now we're going to move on to a graphical environment. Now, typically, I got to add the exclamation point to write it because it's read-only. Now, typically, people would want to use a desktop environment as their graphical interface, but you could also use a window manager. The main difference is that with a graphical environment, it's more of a bundle of software. So it comes with a file manager, it comes with a text editor, maybe it also comes with some type of office as well. And the window manager is just, as its name implies, a window manager. It just manages your windows. So it's a lot more minimalist if you go with the window manager option, and it's a lot more customizable because you can really pick and choose what additional software you want to use with it. Now, in order to have an actual graphical environment, regardless of whether you go with the desktop environment or the window manager route, you're going to need Xorg. So to install that on Arch, we're going to do pacman s and Xorg server and Xorg xinit. And I'll let you know up front that if you're going to be using a desktop environment, then you probably don't need to manually install Xorg and its other utilities because a full desktop environment will typically put those in as dependencies when you install them. So you could just go ahead and install XFCE or whatever type of desktop environment you're going to use, and that'll get your graphical manager or your graphical environment rather up and running. But I'm going to be doing things manually because, like I said, I'm going to be using a window manager. Now, the window manager that I'm going to use is DWM. And the thing about DWM is that it doesn't really make sense to have a binary of it, since we change the configs, hotkeys, color, and extend its functionality through editing the source code directly. So if you want to use DWM as well, you'll have to get the source code and compile it yourself, either from GitHub or from the AUR. I'm just going to clone my config from GitHub though, because I've already spent some time setting it up the way that I like in Gentoo. So I'm just going to git clone github.com mental outlaw DWM. And by the way, if you're going to clone it from GitHub, you should go ahead and install Git because it's not installed by default. And I'm also going to clone dmenu, since that's the suckless utility for the for selecting programs from your menu, and that should be compiled locally as well. And then I'm just going to cd into their directories and go ahead and make them. Let me see, why did that fail? XFT. Oh, maybe I have to install my fonts and then build it again. Let's go into dmenu, see if it does the same thing. Oh, actually, that's failing because I don't have Xinit or XFT installed, so I gotta go ahead and take care of those, just so that my particular config will work. If you're not going to be using those X programs, then you're not going to have to actually do this part. So I'm going to pacman s lib xft lib xinit, and let's see if everything builds correctly now. All right, dmenu built. And DWM still didn't build correctly. Let's see, shiftview.c, no such file or directory. Oh, wait a minute, did I not? I must not have created my repository correctly because I'm missing one of my patches. Okay, let me add actually pause the video real quick because that's a bit of an oversight on my end. Alright, that just goes to show you that even after using Linux for a while, you can still make stupid mistakes. So I have that piece of code that was missing, shifu.c, and now if I make clean install, DWM is able to build correctly. Now, for the rest of my software, I believe that everything can be installed with pacman. So let's go ahead and pacman s rxvt Unicode, PCman FM, TTF, Inconsolata. And RxVT is of course my terminal, PCman FM is a file manager, and TTF Inconsolata is the font that I'm going to be using. And you could also install other fonts like Linux Libertine, whatever fonts work for you. You could also just install a font package, which comes with a bunch of fonts bundled together. A common one is Noto fonts, which is basically just a bunch of free fonts. Now, once all of your packages have been installed, we want to tell Xinit RC, which is the file that Xinit reads when you do the startx command, to basically run all of your graphical stuff. So we want to we want to log in as our user, because I believe you want to create that file as your user and not root, because it could cause some issues. So we'll touch Xinit RC right here inside of my home directory, and then vim into it. And all that we have to put inside of here is exec DWM, and then save the file. So now whenever we start X, that's going to make it run DWM. And if you decided to go the desktop environment route, you still typically have to include a line in Xinit RC to run it. If you want to use XFCE, then the command to write in Xinit RC would be, I'll just type it out here, exec xfce for session. And if you run into problems, I highly suggest that you read the Arch Wiki or the Gentoo Wiki for any special requirements that your desktop environment or window manager may need. Now, another thing that I know I need on my system is XF86 video Intel. And this is necessary for certain Intel systems. Forgot the S command, or the S switch rather. So yeah, this is necessary for certain Intel systems. If you're on AMD, then obviously you're not going to need this. But if you find yourself getting some Xorg server error when you go to start X, installing this package will often fix it. And another kind of general thing that a lot of newer Linux users don't know about is that you have multiple TTYs running. And the TTY is just this black screen that you see here. It's basically a terminal, but not a fully featured terminal where you can spawn a bunch next to each other. But yeah, if you run into some type of weird graphical error where you just can't fix it and you can't really get to this terminal screen here to actually do what you need to do to fix it, you could just do Alt and then the left and right arrow keys to switch to another TTY. And you actually have 6 of them. So you can do that, or you can do Alt and F3 to go to the third one, F4 to go to the fourth one, etc. All right, now I should have everything that I need to go ahead and actually use a GUI on my system. I'm just going to go ahead and switch to full screen so that we can actually enjoy a nice full screen system. And then I just have to start X. And then boom, it goes ahead and it starts up DWM for me. And my RxVT Unicode looks really ugly right now because I don't have a config file for it yet. Usually what I do, I think I've already made a video showing how, yeah, I did make one showing how I set up URXVT, but basically you just install XRDB and then you need to add to your, I'll go into it, even though this is probably harder to see. Let me actually quit out of X and then do it this way. So what you would do is you would install XRDB and then you would just have exec XRDB up here. Well, actually you'd want to do something like that so that it runs right after another. And then you would go ahead and define your color scheme inside of X resources. And I also have a video of how to do that where you can just use terminal.sexy. It's this online website where you can very easily configure a color scheme for your X resources. And then, like I said, exec XRDB is going to make X automatically pull that color information and then replicate it in your terminal. So that's pretty much it for what I do on my systems. Now, some people prefer to have a login screen that comes up when they boot their system, because without one, what you'll get is, well, I'll just go ahead and show you. So this would be your BIOS screen, of course, and then this is the screen you get with Grub to go ahead and boot Arch Linux. But when you do that, you just get this TTY login that you see right here. So like I said, some people don't like this. They would prefer for it to be like a GUI login screen or something like that instead. So what you could do is you could sudo pacman s, I believe it's LightDM. Yeah, so this is a really just lightweight login manager. And because the login manager is something that we want to start pretty much right when we start our system, we have to create a systemd service for it as well. And the command to do that is sudo systemctl enable LightDM service. And like I said, the reason we need to do that is because whenever we start our system up, we don't want to have to run any commands to make that login manager start. We just want to come directly to it. So now I should be able to reboot and have that come up instead. Hopefully that's all you need to do. It's been a while since I've ever used a login manager. Okay, so something about it failed. Let me see if I can figure that out for you guys. All right, so I got LightDM working. There were a few steps that needed to be done, so I'll show you guys on the other TTY the steps that I had to take. So the most important thing was setting up the dwm.desktop file that gets called on by LightDM. So I'll show you guys what it looks like in user share. So I created this folder X sessions right here. You might have it already, but if you don't, just go ahead and create it. And then inside of X sessions, I created this file here, dwm.desktop. And if I cat that out, you can see what's inside of it, just a few lines. But the main one, actually I'll just vim into it. The main one is this one here, because DWM obviously didn't get installed with Pacman. So the root of the problem with LightDM seems to be that it's just not sure where to actually run DWM from, but this tells it where DWM is. This is where it would be if you compiled it from GitHub, regardless of whether you use mine or not. Even if you use a default DWM, it'll be in this folder here. So I did that, and then the other thing that I did was inside of etc LightDM, LightDM.conf, I had to uncomment this line here. And then after I rebooted, LightDM was actually working. It was on this other TTY. I don't know why it's gone now. Let's just go ahead and reboot again. and I'll show you guys logging into LightDM. This is kind of the reason why I don't use it though, because like I said, you can just start your graphical environment with startx. So it's not even really necessary to have a LightDM login manager, especially if you're the only person who's going to be using your computer. But if you do want to install LightDM, now you know how to do it. Now you have a graphical environment, so you can go ahead and install all your other packages through the terminal just like you would in any other Linux distro. So I hope this video helped you guys out. Please like it and share it so other people can see it, and subscribe to the channel to get more videos like this.